How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, April 11th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to review the 2021-22 NBA season that is now completely done by looking at all of the individual NBA players that, of course, qualified for this cutoff list, which is at least 57 games, and for all of the players that went on to average at least 20 points per game this season, which adds up to 29 players if you add into the fact that there are criteria that is eliminating certain players. For instance, LeBron James, arguably the greatest player of all time, is not on this list because he technically played 56 out of the 57 games. So other databases don't have him as completely qualifying for qualifying as a league leader this season in a statistical category. But nonetheless, he was still one of two players this year to average a double-double. As LeBron James did sit alongside Joel Embiid, he was a player that would go on to average his 30.3 points per game. LeBron James would go on to average 8.2 rebounds and 6.2 assists, finishing with 21 double-doubles and 6 triple-doubles on the season. But of course, I mentioned him now because he's not on the original list because you do have to play a certain amount of games to qualify. And then, of course, before I also get into the 29 players that qualified, looking at the one player that would average at least 19 that would just miss the cutoff, the player that averaged the 30th most amount of points that qualified for with the amount of games played was Terry Rozier, the starting shooting guard for the Charlotte Hornets. Terry Rozier would go on to average 19.2 games as he was the third leading scorer for a Charlotte Hornets team that, of course, would qualify for the playoffs this year. Sitting right ahead of him and looking at the players that are averaging just above 20 points per game, the player that's sitting at the very bottom of that threshold was RJ Barrett, the starting shooting guard out of Duke University, who of course went there while I was there, who at the moment is in the midst of his third season, I believe. RJ Barrett went on to average 20 points in the 70 games he played for a New York Knicks team that just missed the playoff cut. He was the second leading scorer on this New York Knicks team, as he would not score as much as Julius Randle, but alongside his 20 points, he would go on in his own way to average his 5.8 rebounds. He averaged 3 assists, 0.6 steals, as well as he also had 4 double-doubles on the season, as RJ Barrett is a player that we are starting to see really kind of come into his own. Sitting right ahead of him at 28th is LaMelo Ball, the elite starting point guard for the Charlotte Hornets, is the second highest scorer on his team, as he was named to an all-star team for the first time this year, the lone all-star for the Charlotte Hornets. And this is, of course, a Hornets team that is entering the play-in round, getting ready to face off against the Atlanta Hawks. Of course, he would end his season alongside his 21 points. He would average 6.6 rebounds, 7.6 assists, and he would average just over a steal and a half per game. He would do all this while he went on to shoot 42% from the field, 38% from three, and 87% from the foul line. He would finish with 22 double-doubles on the season, as he also had 5 triple-doubles. Sitting right ahead of him from the defending champs is Chris Middleton, the 27th highest scorer in the league, at least tied with LaMelo Ball and Julius Randle at 20.1 points per game. He would play 66 games for a Milwaukee Bucks team that is going into the playoffs with the second seed. They are getting ready to face off against the winner of that first play-in game. In the 66 games he played, Chris Middleton would go on to average 32 minutes, which out of all of the playoffs, or out of all of the 30-minute per game scorers, he actually averaged the least amount of minutes out of all of them, alongside his 20 points per game. Or he would do this while shooting 44% from the field, 37% from three, and 80% from the foul line. He would do this while averaging 5.5 rebounds and assists per game, and he averaged just over a steal per game as well, doing his best while being the second leading scorer on the second best team in the East. Sitting right ahead of him, and while also averaging 20.1 points points per game is Julius Randle, the leading scorer of the New York Knicks, who are no longer eligible for the playoffs this season. In the 72 games he played this season, he will go on to average 21 points a game, while on 41% shooting from the field, 30% from three, while shooting 75% from the foul line. He would average nearly a double-double as he averaged 9.9 rebounds and 5.1 assists, averaging just over half a steal and half of a block per game while finishing with 31 double-doubles on the year. I would say his numbers took a little bit of a step back, but considering he's still a consistent 20 points per game scorer, I do think that Julius Randle deserves more respect on his name. But of course, sitting ahead of him is you have a two-way tie for the 24th highest scorer in the league. Starting off in Charlotte, the two-way ties between Miles Bridges, the starting small forward for the Charlotte Hornets, and Fred VanVleet, the all-star starting shooting guard for the Toronto Raptors. Looking first at Miles Bridges, the leading scorer for the Charlotte Hornets, played 79 games for a team that just scraped into the play-in picture, as their next game will be against the Hawks, and their next game could possibly see them get knocked out of the playoffs. But for now, they're still alive. At this moment, at the end of the season, Miles Bridges went on to average 35 minutes a game. He would go on to average 20.3 points per game while shooting 49% from the field, 33% from three, and 80% from the foul line. Pretty good all around. He would average 7 rebounds alongside 3.7 rebounds, averaging just under a steal and just under a block per game as well. He would finish with 15 double-doubles on the season. And sitting alongside him was Fred VanVleet, the second highest scorer for a Toronto Raptors team that would just squeak into the Eastern Conference playoff picture with the 5 seed, as they are set to face off against the Sixers in the next round. Fred VanVleet would be the only all-star name from the Toronto Raptors this season. He would average 20.3 points per game while shooting 40% from the field, nearly 38% from three, and over 87% from the foul line. Alongside his 20 points, he would average 4.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, a steal and a half per game, and half of a block per game, as he had 10 double-doubles and a triple-double for himself. Fred VanVleet will go on to have a really good season for himself, as I imagine this momentum will carry into the playoffs, where they will be facing off against the 4-seed 76ers, as the Sixers have the home court advantage. Sitting ahead of Fred VanVleet, the highest leading scorer coming off the bench was Tyler Herro, the shooting guard for the Miami Heat. And then, of course, taking a look at the leading scorers, he's actually the second highest leading scorer for Miami, as he averaged less than half a point less than Jimmy Butler. But he would average 20.7 points per game while shooting 45% from the field, nearly 40% from three, like 39.9% from three. And he would shoot 87% from the foul line. He did all this while averaging 5 rebounds and 4 assists alongside his nearly 21 points per game. Tyler Herro will go on to finish with 3 double-doubles on the season, as he would be a big part in helping the Heat finish with the best record in the East, 2 games clear of the Bucks, Celtics, and Philadelphia 76ers. This would be a feather in Tyler Herro's cap, as I would believe this is the first time he's averaged 20 points per game. Sitting ahead of Tyler Herro, the 22nd leading scorer in the NBA this season out of all qualified players was DeJounte Murray, the all-star starting point guard for the San Antonio Spurs. This was his very first all-star season this year, as he averaged 21.2 points per game on 46% shooting. He shot 33% from three and 78% from the foul line. Alongside his 21.2 points, he averaged 8.4 rebounds and 9.3 assists. He averaged 2 steals per game, as out of all the 20-point per game scorers, he's the only player that averaged at least 2. He would go on to finish with 39 double-doubles on the season as a point guard, which was a pretty high number, I believe. Out of all point guards, out of all backcourt players, he would finish behind Luka Doncic, James Harden, and Trey Young, as he would have the fourth most double-doubles out of non-big men players. And also, in addition to that, DeJounte Murray would go on to finish with 13 triple-doubles. That would be the second most triple-doubles in the NBA behind Nikola Jokic, just to give a sense of how dominant or just how individually amazing DeJounte Murray's season was. And, of course, cherry on top, he would help the Spurs squeak past the Lakers and make it into the Western Conference play-in round with the 10th best record in the West. Their next matchup will be against the 9-seed Pelicans in the play-in game. And then, of course, sitting ahead of DeJounte Murray is the leading scorer from the top team out in the Eastern Conference. Jimmy Butler was the leading scorer for the Heat, and he also played the least amount of games out of all qualified players. He played 57 of the 82 games as he missed 25 of them. He would average 21.4 points for a Miami Heat team that would finish 2 games clear of the Bucks, Celtics, and Sixers. He would average 21.4 points per game while shooting 48% from the field, 23% from three, and he would shoot 87% from the foul line. Out of all the backcourt players, and actually out of all the players that averaged at least 20 points per game, Jimmy Butler's three-point percentage was actually the lowest. But of course, alongside this, he would average 5.9 rebounds, 5.5 assists. He would also average just over a steal and a half and just at half a block per game. He would finish with 12 double-doubles and 4 triple-doubles while being a very instrumental part to a very good Miami Heat team. And sitting right ahead of him is the 20th highest scoring player in the league, Anthony Edwards, the elite starting small forward for the Minnesota Timberwolves, is coming off of his second season out of Georgia, where he played 71 teams for the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are going into the play-in round, ready to face off against the Clippers. Anthony Edwards was the second highest leading scorer. He was the second leading scorer for this Minnesota Timberwolves team, as he finished right behind Karl Anthony Towns. And Edwards would averaged 21.5 points per game as he shot 44% from the field, 36% from three, and 78% from the foul line. He would go on to average a steal and a half per game as well. And then he would do all this while finishing with 4 double-doubles on the year. And then looking at all the players that did not make the All-Star game this year, he would finish behind Jalen Brown, De'Aaron Fox, Pascal Siakam, and CJ McCollum as the 5th leading scorer in the NBA that didn't make the All-Star game this year. Sitting ahead of Anthony Edwards, the 19th leading scorer in the NBA out of qualified players was Darius Garland. The first-time All-Star for the Cleveland Cavaliers would average 21.8 points per game while playing 67 games for a Cavaliers team that would finish tied with the Nets for the 7th best record in the East. Darius Garland this season would go on to average 21.8 points while shooting 46% from the field, 38% from three, and he shot 89% from the foul line. So incredible shooting numbers all the way around. Alongside his nearly 22 points per game, he would average 3.3 rebounds, 8.6 assists, as well as he averaged over a steal. He would finish with 29 double-doubles on the year, as of course he nearly finished with 30. That's a lot of double-doubles for a point guard. And once that season, now that the season has come to an end, his next matchup that he's looking forward to is against the 7-seed Brooklyn Nets tomorrow in that first Eastern Conference play-in game, as Darius Garland was the leading scorer for the Cleveland Cavaliers this season, in a season that saw them return to the playoffs for the first time without LeBron in a bit. Sitting ahead of Darius Garland, the 18th leading scorer was James Harden, the elite starting shooting guard who now plays for the Philadelphia Phillies, would play 65 total games this season as he started out on the Brooklyn Nets. He would get traded right before the All-Star game as he was the last pick of the All-Star game draft. But regardless, in the 65 games he played, he would average 22 points while shooting 41% from the field, 33% from three, and he shot 87.5% from the foul line. Alongside his 22 points, he would go on to, average 7.7 rebounds, and he averaged 10.3 assists. James Harden's 10.3 assists would be the second most in the NBA behind Chris Paul, but he would go on to be the only 20-point per game scorer that would average a double-double with assists this season, as he would go on to average 1.3 steals per game as well and just over half of a block. James Harden will go on to finish with 46 double-doubles on the season, as his amount of double-doubles would be second most among backcourt players behind only Luka Doncic. James Harden would also go on to finish with 11 triple-doubles, as James Harden's 11 triple-doubles would be the third most amount of triple-doubles in the NBA. Then sitting ahead of James Harden in their next game, they're going to be facing off against the 7 seed Cleveland Cavaliers. If they win this game, they will go on to face off against the 2 seed Milwaukee Bucks, and if they lose, they will have to face off in another play-in game for a chance to play against the Heat. So that's where he's sitting. This comes after he would be the second leading scorer to finish the season out of qualified players on the Philadelphia 76ers this season. And then even looking at what he does, he would be the highest qualified scorer for the Brooklyn Nets this season, as Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving did not play enough games this year. Sitting ahead of James Harden, the 17th leading scorer in the league this season was CJ McCollum. He started the season with the Portland Trailblazers before finishing it on the New Orleans Pelicans. He would play 61 games as his next game ahead of him will be a play-in game against the Spurs. He would average 22.5 points per game this season while shooting 46% from the field. He shot 39% from three. He would go on to shoot 68% from the foul line, though, as his 68% foul line, his free throw percentage would be the lowest free throw percentage out of all the 20 points per game scores in basketball this year. He would still average 4.5 rebounds, just over 5 assists, and just over a steal, as he had 3 double-doubles on the season. His previous team, Portland, would not go on to make the playoffs, but moving teams would, of course, earn him at least another game of safety past this. Sitting right ahead of him, the 16th leading scorer in basketball this season out of qualified scores was Pascal Siakam, the leading scorer for the Toronto Raptors. He would play 68 games this season for a Raptors team that would finish with a 48-34 record. They would see Pascal Siakam averages 22.8 points while shooting 49.4% from the field. He would shoot 34% from three, and he would go on to shoot 75% from the foul line on the season. He would go on to average 8.5 rebounds as well as 5.3 assists. He would average 1.3 steals and just over a block and a half as well, as he would finish with 30 double-doubles on the season and a couple of triple-doubles, while leading the way for a Raptors team whose next opponent is going to be the Philadelphia 76ers in this playoffs coming up. Sitting right ahead of Pascal Siakam, the 15th leading scorer in the NBA this season was De'Aaron Fox. The starting point guard for the Sacramento Kings would play 59 games for a team that would fail to make the playoffs this year, as they had over 50 losses. However, De'Aaron Fox would be their leading scorer. He averaged 23.2 points per game this season while shooting 47% from the field. He would shoot 29.7% from three. He would be one of 3 players out of all 20-point per game scorers that would average at least 30. He would make at least 30. Who would make less than 30% of his threes on the season. However, De'Aaron Fox would shoot 79% from the foul line. He would go on to see himself De'Aaron Fox would average 3.9 rebounds and 5.6 assists, just over a steal per game, as he had 5 double-doubles on the year. Sitting right ahead of him, the highest scoring player this season that didn't make the All-Star team this year would end up being Jalen Brown, the starting shooting guard for the Boston Celtics. Their shooting guard out of Cal will go on to finish with 23.7 points per game in the 65 games he played for a Boston Celtics team that enters the playoffs with a 3 seed, ready to face off against the 6 seed Chicago Bulls. Jalen Brown was the second leading scorer for the Boston Celtics, as he would average his 23.7 points per game while shooting 47% from the field, 36% from three, and 76% from the foul line. Alongside his 23.7 points, he averaged 6.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, assists, and just over a steal per game. He finished with 11 double-doubles, and he would go on to finish with a couple of triple-doubles himself, as he was very instrumental in getting the Boston Celtics to where they are right now. Sitting ahead of him is Zach LaVine, the all-star who is a member of the Chicago Bulls this season, would go on to be Chicago's second leading scorer this year behind DeMar DeRozan. He would average 24.4 points per game while shooting 47% from the field, 39% from three, and 85% from the foul line. Alongside his 24 points per game, he would average 4.5 rebounds and 4.5 assists, as he would not register a double-double all year, but he would be very instrumental in helping the Bulls finish with the sixth best record in the East. After they were leading the East for a good chunk of the year, they go into the playoffs ready to face off against the 3-seed Boston Celtics. Sitting right ahead of Zach LaVine, the 12th leading scorer in the NBA was Karl Anthony Towns, the elite starting center for the Minnesota Timberwolves. He was the third highest scoring center in basketball this year, as he was the Minnesota Timberwolves leading scorer this year ahead of Anthony Edwards. He would average 24.6 points per game while shooting 52.9% from the field, 41% from three, and 82% from the foul line. He was 8 free throw percentage points away from a 50-40-90 season, as while shooting one of the best field goal percentages amongst the 20-point scorers. His 41% from three is actually the highest three-point percentage out of all the players that averaged at least 20 points per game this season, and this is while making at least 2 3-pointers a game as well. Karl Anthony Towns, of course, living up to his billing as one of the best shooting big men, as he did win the 3-point shooting contest this year as well. Alongside his 24.6 points per game, Karl Anthony Towns would average 9.8 rebounds, as he was 0.2 rebounds away from averaging a double-double this season. He averaged 3.6 assists as well. He would average just over a steal and a block. He was one of very few players that would go on to average at least a steal and a block this season while averaging 20 points per game. That would be a very rare feat. He'd be the lowest, or I guess he'd be the other players alongside him to accomplish that feat would be Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo as well. And those would be the only other two players that would accomplish this. At the end of the season, Karl Anthony Towns would finish with 40 double-doubles, as he did have a triple-double at the end of the season. Looking forward into his next game, he's going to be facing off against the Los Angeles Clippers in the first Western Conference play-in game. Sitting ahead of Karl Anthony Towns, there are 11 players in the NBA that went on to average at least 25 points per game. Of the players that would qualify, that missed at the most 25 games this season. Sitting 11th is Stephen Curry, the go-to starting point guard for the Golden State Warriors. I guess he is a quarterback as well. This comes after Curry led the league in scoring last season. Curry would play 64 games for a Warriors team that finished with the third best record in the West, tied with the Heat for the third best record in the NBA. He was the leading scorer for the Golden State Warriors as well. He averaged 25.5 points per game while shooting 43% from the field. He shot 38% from three, making this the first season in his entire NBA career that he shot less than 40% from three. Not to mention that Stephen Curry would also go on to shoot 92% from the foul line, which would be the highest free throw percentage, I believe, in the entire NBA when it comes down to it, to lead the entire NBA in free throw percentage, or at least he sat right behind Jordan Poole, but to lead NBA players in this statistical feat, while, of course, averaging 25 points. The only other players to do that were Trey Young and Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant did not qualify for this list because he missed 28 games, but he was another player who had averaged 30 points per game this season, but just like LeBron James, missed too many games to be a part of this list. But of course, going back to Stephen Curry, he would be, like I said, one of the few 90% free throw shooters, even though he did have one of his career lowest, if not his career lowest, 3-point per shooting season. He would go on to average 5.2 rebounds, 6.3 assists as well. He would average over a steal per game this year. He would finish with 12 double-doubles and 2 triple-doubles. And looking forward, the Golden State Warriors are going into the Western Conference playoff picture, ready to face off against the 6th seed Denver Nuggets, who finished 5 games below them. Sitting ahead of Stephen Curry, looking at the top 10, Donovan Mitchell would be the 10th highest scorer in the NBA. The elite starting shooting guard out of Utah, or for the Utah Jazz, would average 25.9 points per game, while shooting 45% from the field, 35% from three, and 85% from the foul line, while being the leading scorer from the Utah Jazz, the 5th best team in the Western Conference. Alongside his nearly 26 points per game, he would average 4.2 rebounds, he would average 5.3 assists and a steal and a half per game. He did all this while he would finish with 3 double-doubles on the season. Sitting ahead of Donovan Mitchell is Devin Booker. The elite starting shooting guard for the Phoenix Suns would be the Suns' leading scorer this year, and the Suns will go on to have the best record in the NBA this season. While missing only 14 games this year, Devin Booker would average 26.8 points per game while shooting 46.6% from the field, 38% from the three, and 38% from three, and he will go on to shoot 87% from the foul line. He did all this while averaging 5 rebounds and nearly 5 assists per game, and he would average just over a steal per game, as Devin Booker would finish with 5 double-doubles at the end of the year. The Phoenix Suns are looking forward to seeing how the Western Conference play and matchups play out, to see who they will even play in the first round. But Devin Booker was a big part of the reason that the Suns would finish with such a dominant record, finishing 8 games better than the second best team in the entire NBA. Sitting ahead of Devin Booker, the 8th leading scorer out of qualified players in the NBA was Jason Tatum. The elite small forward for the Boston Celtics would play 75 games and be their leading scorer as they finished with the 3rd seed in the East. Jason Tatum would average 26.9 points per game as he would shoot 45% from the field, 35% from three, and 85% from the foul line. Alongside his 27 points per game, he would average 8 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 1 steal, and about half of a block per game. He averaged 0.7 blocks per game. He would finish with 22 double-doubles on the year, and looking forward to what he has ahead of him, the Celtics are going into the playoffs ready to face off against the Chicago Bulls, as Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum versus DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine is looking like a very an amazing matchup as I move further with this. Sitting ahead of Jason Tatum is the reigning NBA regular season MVP, Nikola Jokic, the elite starting center for the Denver Nuggets. He would put together a historic season this year, as he would put together a 2,000 point, 1,000 rebound, 500 assist season for the Denver Nuggets this year, as he may as well have wrapped up another MVP season. I would imagine. They haven't named it yet at this point, but I would guess that is going to be Nikola Jokic. He would go on to average 27.1 points per game, while he shot 58% from the field, 33% from three, and he would shoot 81% from the foul line. Out of all of the 20-point-per-game scores, he would have the highest field goal percentage while shooting 17 shots a game. He would do all this while averaging 13.8 rebounds, which would be the most rebounds per game out of all 20 points per game scores. The only player that had more rebounds than him this year was Rudy Gobert from the Utah Jazz, as he had 14.7, nearly a full more rebound than Nikola Jokic. However, Nikola Jokic would go on to average 7.9 assists. He, of course, would have the most assists of anyone that wasn't a guard. And outside of James Harden and Luka Doncic, he had the most assists out of anyone that wasn't a sheer point guard. And then, of course, outside of that, Nikola Jokic would go on to average a steal and a half per game, which is very high amongst centers. He will go on to finish at least in the top 15 in that statistical category. Not to mention that he was top, starting from the beginning, Nikola Jokic he would finish 7th in total points. He would finish 2nd in rebounds per game. Nikola Jokic would go on to finish 8th in assists per game. He would go on to finish, of course, with 1.5 steals per game. He would go on to average 0.9 blocks per game, which would tie him for 26th. But of course, going back to double-doubles, he would lead the NBA with 66 of them, only having 8 games in which he didn't record a double-double. He would also go on to lead the NBA in triple-doubles, as he had 19, 6 more than the player that had the second most triple-doubles, which was DeJounte Murray for the San Antonio Spurs. Also, Nikola Jokic would lead the NBA in player efficiency rating at 33.01 to get a sense of how individually dominant his season was. Looking forward to see what's on his plate. The Nuggets are going to be facing off against the 3rd seed Golden State Warriors as they sit 5 games behind them in the regular season, as Nikola Jokic was the leading scorer for the Nuggets this year. Sitting ahead of Nikola Jokic, the 6th leading scorer amongst qualified players was Ja Morant. The elite starting point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies would only miss 25 games this season, but still qualify as a season leader. He would go on to average 27.4 points per game while shooting 49% from the field, 34% from 3, and 76% from the foul line. He would be the leading scorer of a Memphis Grizzlies team that finished with the 2nd best record in the entire NBA, 8 games behind the Phoenix Suns. Alongside his 27 points per game, Ja Morant would average 5.7 rebounds, 6.7 assists, and just over a steal per game. As he was named to his very first All-Star game in his career, I believe, he would go on to finish with 10 double-doubles, as he also finished with a sole triple-double this season, as well as a bunch of incredible highlights as well, as he was named an All-Star starter this year as well. Sitting ahead of Ja Morant, moving into the top 5, the 5th leading scorer in the NBA in terms of average amongst qualified players was DeMar DeRozan. The all-star starting small forward for the Chicago Bulls would average nearly 28 points per game this season. He would average 27.9 points while shooting 50% from the field, 35% from 3, and he would shoot 88% from the foul line. Alongside these, he would average 5.2 rebounds and 4.9 assists. So he was averaging about 28, 5, and 5, arguably one of his best statistical seasons ever. And he would average nearly a steal per game while finishing with 6 double-doubles for a Chicago Bulls team that was leading the East for a good chunk of the season. But now they are going into the playoffs ready to face off against the 3-seed Boston Celtics, as the Celtics have home court advantage, as that matchup will feature 2 teams with 2 20 points per game scorers, as the Celtics have Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum on one side, and the Bulls have DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine on the other. Sitting ahead of DeMar DeRozan is a season that I believe deserves just as much recognition as Nikola Jokic. It's Trey Young, the elite starting point guard from the Atlanta Hawks. He would only miss 7 games all year, as he averaged 28.4 points per game. He would do all this while shooting 46% from the field, 38% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line. Trey Young would be one of few players to average at least 25 points per game and shoot at least 90% from the free throw line. He did so alongside Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. Steph Curry, he would average more points than Steph Curry, and he would go on to play 20 more games than Kevin Durant while doing so. Trey Young would finish 4th in the NBA in points per game, but he would go on to lead the NBA in total points scored. Not to mention that alongside all that, he would go on to average 3.7 rebounds. He would average 9.7 assists. His 9.7 assists would be the 3rd most in the NBA behind Chris Paul and James Harden. But when you add it up, Trey Young will go on to lead the NBA in total assists this year as well. This would be the 2nd time in NBA history that a player would lead the NBA in total points and assists. And this came after Trey Young has already led college basketball in total points and assists. And this is when he was a freshman at Oklahoma. So yes, give Trey Young his flowers right now. He was also able to average a steal as he finished with 41 double-doubles on the year, as he was unable to register a single triple-double. Going into the play-in round, Trey Young and the Hawks are getting ready to face off against the 10-seed Charlotte Hornets for a chance to even play in that second play-in game for a chance of playing against the 1-seed Miami Heat. So that's where the Atlanta Hawks are. Sitting right ahead of Trey Young was the player that he was traded for in the 2018 NBA draft, Luka Doncic. The elite starting shooting guard out of Slovenia would average 28.5 points per game while shooting 45% from the field, 38% from three, and 74% from the free throw line. Out of all the players that are averaging at least 25 points per game, he shot the second lowest free throw percentage, just above Giannis. But sitting alongside all that, he would go on to average 9.1 rebounds and 8.7 assists alongside his 28 points. He would average just over a steal per game. He would finish with 44 double-doubles on the year. His 44 double-doubles would be the seventh most in basketball, tied with Nikola Vucevic. And he would go on to finish with 10 triple-doubles. His 10 triple-doubles is tied with Russell Westbrook for the fourth most in the NBA this season, as there were 5 players in the NBA to register a double-digit amount of triple-doubles. Not to mention that Luka Doncic would also finish with the 5th highest PER in basketball, behind Trey Young, Joel Embiid, Giannis, and Nikola Jokic from 4th to 1st. But that is where he was sit this year. And of course, he was able to help the Mavericks make it into the playoffs this year. They are getting ready to face off against the 5th seed Utah Jazz once the playoffs come around, as the Mavericks go into the playoffs with the 4th seed, as Luka Doncic, of course, was the leading scorer of that team. Sitting right ahead of Luka Doncic was Giannis Antetokounmpo, the second leading scorer amongst qualified players. Will go on to average nearly 30 points. He averaged 29.9 points in 67 games played. He would shoot 55% from the field, which was the second highest field goal percentage out of 25 point per game scorers, and even 20 points per game scorers, as only Nikola Jokic had a higher field goal percentage. Giannis shot 29.3% from three. And then even looking at his numbers, the only player that shot a lower 3-point percentage out of the 20 point per game scorers was Jimmy Butler. And then alongside his 3-point percentage, he shot 72% from the foul line. His 72% from the foul line is the lowest free throw percentage of the 25 points per game scorers this year. He would go on to, he did as well, averaging 11 free throw attempts per game, which would be the second most in the NBA. He would go on to average 11.6 rebounds and 5.8 assists alongside his nearly 30 points. He would average 1.1 steals and 1.4 blocks, making him one of 3 25 points per game scorers that averaged at least a steal and a block this season, sitting alongside Joel Embiid and specifically Karl Anthony Towns. Giannis Antetokounmpo would finish the season with 46 double-doubles. That would be tied with Joel Embiid and Domantas Sabonis for the 4th most double-doubles on the year. And not to mention, he would finish with 4 triple-doubles on the year while leading the Milwaukee Bucks to the 2nd seed in the East. Of course, this comes after Giannis Antetokounmpo was named the NBA Finals MVP after winning his very first championship last year. So we are still in the midst of Giannis's prime, and we are still seeing that he was completely dominant this year, not to mention that he did miss 15 games this year. And then, of course, the leading qualified scorer in the NBA this year for 2021-22 was Joel Embiid, the elite starting center for who came out from Kansas, who was starting for the Philadelphia 76ers, would average 30.6 points in 68 games for a Sixers team that is going into the playoffs with the 4th seed. He would average 30.6 points per game while shooting nearly 50% from the field. He shot 37% from three and over 80% from the foul line on over 11 attempts per game. He would average nearly 10 free throws made per game, which is a very big part of the 30 points per game, as Outside of his free throws made per game, he averaged exactly 21 points. He would go on to average 11.7 rebounds, making him one of 3 players that would average a 25-point double-double this season. And, of course, he would be one of 3 players that would average a double-double with rebounds to make it into this list, and he would be one of 4 players, including James Harden, to average a 2010 season for the year. Joel Embiid would average at least 1 steal. He averaged 1.1 steals and a block and a half per game. He would be one of 3 players alongside Giannis and Karl Anthony Towns as the 3 players that finished with averaging at least a steal and a block per game this season as well as 20 points and 10 rebounds. Joel Embiid would go on to finish the season with 46 double-doubles as he went on to finish with 2 triple-doubles for the season. But as this season ends, Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia 76ers are most definitely looking out to face off against the 5th seed Toronto Raptors once the Eastern Conference play-in games are over, as he was the lone player on the Philadelphia 76ers that was on this list. Congratulations to Joel Embiid for being the scoring champ, as I know it was very tough. And, of course, congratulations to these 29 for missing less than 29 games and averaging at least 20 points per game this season. And, of course, congratulations to the NBA players that were able to average 20 points per game within their own right. I would be able to mention them, but, just the way ESPN is listed, I'm really going off of ESPN right now. They're just not showing them. But I do want to take this time to thank the ESPN website and, of course, NBA for giving me all the facts and figures that I needed. I want to thank everyone for listening to all 40 minutes of this piece. I do hope all is well. And as we navigate through the playoffs one day at a time, I would implore you just keep following along as we just keep discovering more as the NBA season moves one day at a time. And hopefully by this time tomorrow, I will do another episode for all of today's exhibitions and matchups for Monday, April 11th. And this time next year, I will do another end of season episode regarding all the 20-point per game players, because it's a very impressive feat to even do such a thing this year. With that said, I want to thank everyone for listening. I hope all is well. Today is Monday, April 11th, 2022. I'm James Sims. This is The Elite, and I'll catch you with more tomorrow. Thanks for listening, and peace out.